Yeah, I guess let's get the interview started. Yeah. We first want to really show appreciation for you taking your time doing the interview with us. And we just want to introduce this little mini project of ours a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, in the past we have interviewed a lot of alumni, some recent graduates, but this time around we want to try something different. We want to do a mini advancement team series because we feel like advancement team, they're basically the engine of the school, but yet we feel like they're, a little bit behind the scenes, sometimes not, getting the recognition they deserve. So we want to really, on top of showing appreciation to gain some exposure, of the advancement team and the different career paths the student might be interested in. So yeah, we just really want to take this opportunity to really, show the different careers and what they like. So
It's
without further,
great. Great.
yeah.
Congrats on your initiative too, by the way. It's really excellent. You guys have done a great job. I've watched all the other ones, and I kind of actually have to be honest. I was thinking this is stuff like maybe we should have been doing in our office. So I have to say you're really it's very, very impressive. So thanks a lot for taking it on.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Yeah, I guess without further ado, we will go to our first questions. So for starters, Mr. Robertson, can you tell us a little bit about what your job in advancement, particularly in the fundraising category, entails?
I sure can. So I think a lot of people know, maybe they've heard about charities and fundraising for charity. I think a lot of people have had exposure to that, but maybe not for education, higher education. You think about hospitals, museums, that sort of thing. So I'd say that that's sort of the fundraising that we're doing. And what I think the most important thing about our job is to engage people with the mission of the college. So it's really talking to people about what it is we're trying to achieve and finding common ground and having, I think, also some values in common, because really our job is to try to have a partnership with people. People want to make a difference, and people want to support education, which is, I think, really important for the world in general. And so I really spend a lot of my time trying to get to know people, trying to understand what makes them tick, why they're interested in engaging with us, and sharing about some of the really interesting and amazing things we're doing as a college.
Yeah. So that brings us to my question. Can you please describe us what does a regular day in your life look like? And
yes, I can. It's not always typical. I think, look, I'm a mother, so I do have two children, and sometimes that usually starts with something to try to help organize them. In my work life, we have definitely a lot of meetings with my team. We work with somebody in operations who helps with our data collection. We do a lot of things that are probably, again, you may not imagine. In a relationship business, we do look at data a lot. We look at different kinds of engagement. We look when people are attending events, if people are engaged with our organization. We look at, how long they've been in our community. So we do spend quite a lot of time looking at that kind of information. I usually have a strategy session every day. And so we talk about some of the things that we have underway and how they're working, whether or not we can make some tweaks to them. The other piece that's really important for fundraising is obviously the finance aspect. And so we have to understand the financial model of the college. We have to understand what role the funding plays and what we're actually seeking to raise money for and how that will have impact. So we look at spreadsheets a fair bit as well and that sort of thing. And then I always spend a lot of time reaching out to the people that I know who are interested, who I have relationships with, or to new people who are maybe new parents to the school or recent graduates, to find out really, what they're up to, and then also to let them know what we're up to. So there's a lot of, definitely a lot of relationship engagement that occurs. That's pretty much in a nutshell. If we wouldn't be in COVID times, we would also be doing a lot of in-person events. because of course building relationships has a lot of personal connection as well. I do travel a bit. So in regular times, I would travel to different locations around the world where we have groups of alumni, groups of families who are UCC families, and usually with the principal, we would go and meet those families. Also, sometimes even prospective students if we're traveling a big distance. So it's varied and it's really interesting. And the best part is I get to meet tons of really great people.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you said, you and your team use data as part of like relation management. Because like my opinion or perception of relation management, the word data is not really kind of in this conversation. So would you mind like kind of elaborating on like how you and your team utilize data? Just go more in details if possible.
Sure, yeah, of course. I think that is a surprise to people. And I think that, with any kind of organization, part of how we determine who is going to be a big supporter of the school is looking at some of the ways in which they've been involved. So some of the data we look at, I mentioned before, is how many times they've been engaged. So we actually have an engagement score that we look at for alumni of the school, for parents of the school. That's based on a number of different contact points. It's based on things like whether or not they open our emails when we send them. We can look at what kind of subjects they're interested in. So if you open all the emails that have to do with athletics, probably gives me a pretty good idea you're maybe interested in athletics. We look at that kind of data as well. What were people involved in when they were students? So if you were head of Model UN or you were involved with the World Affairs Conference, then I would tend to target some of my communication around what your interests are. So we use that kind of information as well. We also look at wealth screenings. So we look at, when we're actually getting right into the fundraising and how much people might be able to contribute. We look at all kinds of data around wealth. That goes everything from, your postal code and where you live to different kinds of jobs people have. In Canada, there's a little less data than you would get in the United States, for example. There's a bit more privacy, which is probably a good thing, but you can find out a lot of information about people. And we do use a lot of that data to help us with prospecting and looking at who really would be an excellent person to get engaged that has capacity to make a transformational kind of gift, because that is what we're looking to do in the end of the day. We are looking to really advance UCC in the best way possible. And people have so many great ideas and dreams and things that could happen. And as you know, that usually takes some financial resources to make it possible. So this is how we partner up with some of our potential donors and community members. And the data is crucially important for us. We always say if it doesn't go in the database, it didn't happen.
That's super interesting. And so you've had so many years of experience in this career leading huge projects like fundraising campaigns. So we wanted to ask you, what's a really interesting thing you've learned from leading big projects such as fundraising campaigns for schools?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think the most important thing whenever you're taking on a project, and it can be fundraising or it can be any kind of work situation, there has to be alignment with the senior leadership. There has to be alignment with, if you have a board, some sort of, in our case, we have a board of governors. There has to be alignment within your organization. I think your mission and vision have to be very clear, and people have to understand what that is. I think you have to, certainly if you're endeavoring to do something that's going to be really world changing or transformational, it has to be fairly urgent. So there has to be an urgency to why now, why us? I think you need to have evidence about why you're going to make an impact. So I think, again, you can think about a lot of really interesting things you'd like to do, but why is it important? And I think having all of those things in place and the alignment around what you're doing and agreement about what you're doing to start is the most important thing to set up for success. I've seen a lot of organizations, and I've been at organizations where you don't have that. People have different points of view. People really want to do very different things. Sometimes the leader is on a completely different page, and that makes it very difficult, especially in fundraising. If you're going out to ask somebody for a contribution, and it doesn't resonate, or it can't be delivered, or the teachers don't agree, or the principal thinks it should be something else. So we definitely have to make sure that we're aligned. And I spend a lot of time talking about what kinds of priorities we have and ensuring we have very clear understanding on all of that. That's the most important thing, I think.
Yeah. So speaking of alignment, actually, I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, you and your team has led, closed the largest, I guess, campaign, in the history of independent schools in Canada, 104.7 million. Was that for the Think Ahead, I guess, strategic campaign?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, while we're on that, just, this large project, can you please walk us through the process, from the start to the very end of this very successful fundraising campaign?
Sure. I mean, I think that, again, the most important thing was starting with what is it we wanted to achieve. And in Think Ahead, the idea of offering more student financial assistance was really the core. And so we looked at peer schools in the United States, for example, some of the very best schools in the world. If you think about even universities that have the ability to attract students regardless of whether they can pay the fees or not. So that tuition starts to become more ubiquitous, and it's not the defining factor of who gets in and who doesn't get in. And so Think Ahead was really about building a really big endowment fund that would help to supply student financial assistance for many years into the future. And so 50% of the campaign, so $50 million, was raised for student financial aid. I think financial aid is misunderstood in Canada in particular. I don't think it's so, I think it's fairly common in the United States, but, and elsewhere in the world, perhaps it's less understood also. Because in Canada, we have more of a social system. And so public school is free. And, if you pay to come to an independent school, you might kind of wonder, well, why would we want students to not pay? Why would we want them to come and have a free ride, let's say? And I think the answer to that is that we believe that, education shouldn't be based, again, on whether or not you can afford it. We think that it should be available to the very best students. Some of them may be able to pay the full fees. That's awesome. And some may not. So that's one reason, but it also makes us more competitive. If you think about the number of people who can actually afford this type of education, it's a very small number. It's only actually about 0.2% of the Canadian population who could afford to pay. So we want to open the door. We want to try to make it accessible. And, I think there's also a social reason why we believe it's an important thing for a school like ours that has a lot of privilege to try to endeavor to do. So that was the core of Think Ahead. And then there was also money raised for facilities. We have some facilities that are in really great shape, and we have some facilities that could use some renovation. And at that time, there were even more that could use renovation. So we definitely focused a lot on the boarding facility, for example. There were a lot of improvements made there. Some of the classrooms in the upper school that you'll know which ones were renovated and which ones weren't. But that's really important for a school like ours because we want to be aligned with 21st century learning. Things change in the classroom. Classrooms have gone kind of from the teacher at the front, just kind of saying information, to a lot more collaboration, a lot more groups working together. And so that was very, very important for UCC as well to move into the future. And I think that, we also made a fairly significant investment in programs and faculty development. So you might not know this, but we have a really generous budget for our teachers to be able to pursue professional development. And again, we think that's really important because if we want them to continue to innovate, if we want them to be, at the forefront of their careers and to be able to help the boys really learn in the best possible way, they need to keep learning. They need to keep having access to opportunities. And so that was another big piece of the campaign. It took us 10 years. And so it's not a short time. It's something that I think you have to be prepared to know that it will take time, and that when you're asking people for money, it's on their schedule more than it's on your schedule. And so I think that's one thing that is important but difficult sometimes for organizations, because they'd like to do everything all at once right now. And people might say, Sarah, you know, I really love UCC, I want to support, but actually right now we have another investment. We're not able to give you the money now. You know, come back to us in 2-3 years. And so I think that's one thing we learned from that campaign, that, you know, you have to be donor centered and you have to align some of your objectives with what your donors are actually able to do and when. But it was a really successful campaign, as you say, the most successful in Canadian independent schools still to this day. And was a super success in terms of bringing together the community as well. Not just the money that was raised, but how engaged people were able to feel with the values at UCC, and feeling like, wow, this is we're all in this together, and we want to see the success of our school.
Yeah, so you mentioned a key aspect to these projects is relationship building and really meeting people and things like that. So would you mind sharing, like, what are some key things to keep in mind when it comes to developing relationships, whether that be a teacher or maybe like a boss or colleague in the workplace?
I think that ultimately, you know, the first step is just meeting people and trying to be open to that is sometimes the scariest one, because you're never sure if people are interested in meeting you, if they're interested in what you have to say. I think a lot of us are, you know, if you're shy or if you feel like, you know, it's not sort of natural to you, you're inclined not to take that first step. But usually I think, you know, with work or with an organization like UCC, people are actually quite interested in meeting others who are associated with the organization. You know, it's not that often that you get a really bad rejection. So taking the first step, I think, is a really important one. I think that people probably don't value relationships enough in terms of what that can do in your career and in your life. And so, you know, they can be often a little bit superficial about it. I think genuine and being, you know, honest is really important. I know when things go wrong in relationships, and that happens a lot in business and, you know, in fundraising, the hardest thing is to pick up the phone and say, like, ooh, this isn't going well, or we made a mistake. Or, you know, I have a donor actually just the other day who dropped off a check at the sort of holiday time around December, and we lost it. I don't know where it went. I have no idea how it got misplaced. Thankfully, didn't get cashed by anyone, but I had to call him and, you know, say, I'm really sorry, but we lost your check. It was $25,000, so it was not insignificant. I felt terrible and I didn't want to do it, but I had to. And I think that I learned over time, you know, those sorts of conversations, which are the hardest, are actually what builds trust with people, because even though he wasn't thrilled, he would prefer to know, and he was glad that I told him. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing. People can trust you and you're transparent, even with bad news. I think you can get a long way. And just maintaining them is another thing, you know, just checking in with people. Sometimes you don't feel like you have a lot to say. Maybe there's not a big development to talk about, but people are interested to be kept in the loop. You maybe remember there was a news story on UCC I think it was on City News. It was talking about the pandemic, and they were talking about when the school was closed. And it was kind of, it was there was a whole bunch of aerial shots of the college. Like, it wasn't much of a news story because lots of schools were closing at that time, but it was, but I forwarded it to a few people I know, and we started a conversation. And again, sort of a simple bit of information, but just keeping people looped in. I think people like to be in the know, and they like to be they like it when you connect with them. They like it when you ask their opinion. I think asking people's advice is always a really good way to build a relationship. People love being asked for their advice, for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Those are all great tips, Mr. Robertson. So we're just like to switch gears for a bit. We know you have experience leading the Robertson Foot Soldiers team for charity. So we just want to ask, you know, can you please describe experience leading that team, and what are some of the biggest takeaways from the experience?
So that's an interesting one, because I got involved with that organization because it was a personal connection. My father had been diagnosed with peripheral neuropathy, which was thought to potentially be ALS at the time. And that was pretty scary. And so we really got involved in helping to raise some money to support some of the research and some of the progress that, they're trying to make in science to help this disease. I have to say, my best takeaway was putting my brother in charge. He was actually the leader, not me. He was excellent. My brother was very determined, and he raised the most money by far. Our team actually raised the most money in our region for about 10 years in a row, and that was because of my brother. So maybe a takeaway on that one is, put someone in charge who you think is really competent and really capable. You don't always have to be the person in the front. He did a better job than I did, for sure. I think the other thing is, you're afraid to ask people sometimes, especially for money. People hate, I don't know what it is, but it's like a universal thing. People hate asking people for money in general. And really the way I look at it is, it's not like you're asking for yourself. You're not receiving the funds. You're actually asking for your organization, whether that be a hospital or in this case was a charity that was doing really good work. And so I think if you can get out of the mindset of, oh my God, I'm asking for money, and more into the mindset of, oh, wow, this is an opportunity for someone to contribute to a really important cause. And it's not coming to me, it's going to the organization. I think that is really helpful. That could be in business as well, right? If you're talking about a sale, whether you're in a sales position or anything like that. I think that's important. And then I think it's really important to realize, like, not everyone will support you, and that's okay. And, I think sometimes I say I'm in the rejection business because a lot of people say no. But if you were deterred by that, I think in life, you would really be quite discouraged. You got to get used to hearing no. It happens all the time. And fundraising is no exception. So I think, people surprise you, and people actually often do support more generously than you even ever imagined. That's been the greatest gift of my job in philanthropy, like working with donors who've given more money than I could ever personally imagine earning, and they give it away. And I just think that's an incredible, it's incredibly lucky to be engaged with people like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, we all know, like, being someone who's in charge of fundraising isn't really, what we consider the typical career here at UCC. Like here at UCC, people consider like finance, engineering, etc. So it's I would say it's a pretty niche career. So like for someone who might, after this whole interview, be inspired to become someone who wants to become involved with fundraising, how do you recommend like the career path they should take in terms of that?
Well, I think so. That's a really nice way of saying, like, no one actually really thinks about fundraising as a career. It's true. Who would think of fundraising as a career? It doesn't really seem. I certainly didn't when I started. I didn't know really much about it. Of course, I had been solicited by charities, and I knew about like giving as a donor, but I just never really thought about, wow, there's a whole group of people out there who do this for a living. I think that why they might want to consider it is, look, if you are interested in making really significant change, a lot of our organizations do that, whether it's, again, an educational organization or a hospital or some sort of social impact organization. So there's an ability to make a change, for one thing. I think also you do have to be very well versed in things like finance and business to understand what does the balance sheet look like at your organization. And you have to be able to make the case to people who are I would say, for the most part, quite successful people who want to know the detail of that, who are expecting someone with a fairly good knowledge of the organization's financial workings. So, definitely it's not sort of just like meeting people and going to parties and having, events. There's a lot of really interesting work that goes on that I think people might not be aware of. In terms of a career path, I think the humanities are underrated in general. And I think having a humanities degree is super helpful in any kind of career path. Even people who are pursuing, ultimately science or business or anything like that, I think as a base, it's really good. Any background, of course, is helpful. If you wanted to be a fundraiser for, for a hospital, for example, and you had some sort of science background, that would be beneficial because you'd be able to better understand some of the things that are happening. I think ultimately, it's important to get involved with organizations you care about. And so whether you do that as a career or whether you do that as someone who ends up being a volunteer or perhaps a donor, I think that you can gain exposure to lots of different organizations that way. And my personal view is education is a great place for a fundraising career. Education is the top philanthropic destination of any giving in the entire world. You've heard of the big gifts, right? From some of the big billionaires like Michael Bloomberg, who's given over $1 billion to his educational or his alma mater. Education is very, very attractive to philanthropists because they know it can make a change in the world. They know that, there's a possibility for people to go off and do so many amazing things, and that education is really the place where it starts. So I'm biased, but I would say educational fundraising is really one of the best areas to be involved in. And you get to be engaged with, whether it's at a school, young people, which is awesome. You never feel like you're detached from what's happening in the world. And if you're at a university, you get to be around professors and like deep thinkers and students. So it's a great environment to be in as well for your career.
That's great. That's great. Like speaking of education, I want to kind of like switch gears. I find it super interesting that, you teach a fundraising course at George Brown College. Like it would be super cool, like personally for me to like, take a fundraising. What is it like to teach a fundraising course? What kind of content do you teach, Ms. Robertson?
So I haven't done that one for a little while, but it was, a lot of people who are entering into this field feel like they need a bit of guidance on some of the key aspects of the work. So one of the things that I would help and help teach was looking at how do you write a proposal. So if I am going to ask somebody for a very significant gift, for example, I actually write a formal proposal, just like a business proposal. We talk about, how much money it's going to be. We talk about how the payments are going to be made, because a lot of times, if someone pledges $1 million, they don't often just write the check for $1 million. They pledge it maybe over a period of time. So perhaps it's a 10-year pledge. So we set up a pledge schedule. The proposal also has to include some of the deliverables that we will be committing to. So for example, if we're setting up a faculty professional development program, we would want to commit to the donor, look, we're going to be having 5 different courses. These are what they are. This is when they'll take place. This is how many people are going to be impacted. Reporting is incredibly important. I think it's important for our own organization to show that we're spending the money effectively and as we said we would. But of course, it's critical for the donors, and donors are more demanding nowadays too. I think they really want to know that their funding is having impact. So that's one of the things I would teach. We also talk about building a case for support. So when you're trying to articulate what your priorities are and how they'll have impact, there's a certain way of doing that. I would say it's really just marketing and communications, but it's particular to advancement. We would talk about doing feasibility studies and how those work, because we do a lot of consultation with our community before we launch fundraising objectives to make sure that they resonate. I mean, if you guys say, oh, this is a terrible idea, we're probably not going to go pursue that. So there's lots of different aspects. Working with volunteers and working with a volunteer board is also extremely important. And if people haven't done that before, there's quite a lot you can learn about how to effectively engage people and get them motivated for your organization. Volunteers are amazing, but they're doing it for free. So you got to figure out ways to really get them excited, and even how to structure some of your volunteer boards as well. Those are some of the things that we talked about in our classes. we also did a few models of like, actually just sitting in front of somebody and asking for a gift, because some people don't feel comfortable with that. So we practice that and talk about some strategies and ways that you can be effective. So that's another one.
Wow, it sounds like a really interesting class to me. Yeah. Yeah, Miss Robertson, we also know you have worked in INSEAD, in University of France, I believe. Can you please walk us through the experience working there, and what do you think are the advantages of having experience working internationally and working for a university, compared, for high school? Yeah.
So I think that experience working internationally is so, so important. For me, it was transformational in my life, in my career. I think sometimes it's underestimated by employers. I'm not sure. I thought, wow, people are going to think this is super amazing. I'm not sure employers totally do appreciate it as much as they should, because what it does, of course, and you guys would know, having been here, you're here also having an international experience, right? You learn so much about the way people operate, how different people are. You develop sort of, I think, a much better appreciation for cultural differences. You have a discomfort of living in a place that's not familiar to you, and that actually causes you to, I think, try to understand things in a different way. It builds resilience, because things don't go exactly as you thought they would, or they're just not familiar, and therefore it makes it, it makes it something you have to really actually deal with day to day. So I think working internationally is extremely valuable, especially in the world that we live in, that is diverse, that is, global, where you will be dealing with people from a lot of different places. If you're working for a multinational organization, you absolutely will. And so it's extremely important. I think for me personally as well, I just was able to think about things in a different way. And I'm not sure I would have been able to have that kind of mindset change just staying here in Canada. I learned, I speak a different language, only one. I'm disappointed I don't have more than that, but I think multiple languages is also a really great asset that people can gain from having an international experience. And now I have friends around the world too. And if I want to go to France, I can have a place to stay, which is cool. And a few other places as well. So that's worth it in and of itself.
Yeah, 100%. Just kind of like to add on to that question, like, what's the difference between like working as a, I guess, fundraising manager at a university and compared with a high school?
That's a really good question. Obviously, there's a difference in terms of the student body, and I think that obviously that affects the priorities that the organization is raising funds to support. They're both very different, but also really compelling. So in a university, for me, what was really exciting, and I was working it was a business school specifically. And so I was exposed to all kinds of really amazing business leaders. I love business. I did also, do some business studies at INSEAD. And so that was a personal interest to me. We had, all kinds of amazing speakers, CEOs from all around the world, some of the top business leaders. And you're also interacting with, academia, which is another level of thinking, of course, right? So, whether it was a professor who was talking about family business or, derivatives, or who knows what topic could have been on the list, I felt like I was learning a lot all the time. And I think that you have exposure to some of the leading thinkers in the world, which is very, very interesting. In a school, the advantage is that you're working to advance something that is, affecting young people. And I think, that's the formative years of your life. Like when you're here, even though you'll go on to do amazing things and different things, the friendships you form here, the person you become is really during this time. And I think that is a very special thing. And it's something, where if you care about education and you care about people, that it feels really great to be involved with it. you also feel like I don't know, you feel you feel kind of young because you're around young people all the time, and you don't feel like you're out of touch, even though I know my daughters tell me I am. You're not as detached from youth, and that's a really nice thing to see. I love seeing the friendships that are formed here. One of my favorite things is to go, when we're doing the alumni events, to see guys like meet up with each other who haven't seen each other for a while. When we hold the reunions, I've just never seen friendships like this ever. Even university people, like people who go on to amazing universities, they have a great experience, but their UCC friends will always be those guys, who they grew up with. And that's a totally different kind of relationship. And it's very, very special. So I think that you don't see that to the same degree at a place like INSEAD, where people are there for only 18 months. They form good friendships, but it's not the same as at UCC.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of reunion, I know like there's like a leaving class fund. Mm-hmm. Like I read it like, in the old boys magazine and all that stuff. Like I'm curious, like what's the leaving class fund like specifically used for?
So we establish a class fund for every class that graduates from UCC, and it's usually a scholarship fund. So the idea is the boys who are leaving kind of leave a legacy and an opportunity for another student to have that UCC experience who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford to come here. And so usually we ask the parents in the first stages, because you guys are still building up your careers. It might be a while before you can make donations to the school. But we ask the parents to make a gift at the end of the year, like in sort of in honor of your son's graduation. We set up the fund, and then that fund remains for forever, in perpetuity. It's an endowed fund. So it's invested with our foundation. We have a very sophisticated foundation that invests all the funds that have been endowed to the college, which right now we have about $110 million that are invested. We use about 4% of that revenue per year. So obviously, in terms of investment strategy, we're trying to earn more than that, so that we preserve the capital, but also are able to utilize about 4% each year. And so the class funds are there, they're there, and we encourage people over the years to give back. And it's a nice way for graduates, when they're able to support another UCC boy, and also to sort of have a bit of connection and camaraderie with their class. We do usually, at reunion times, people come back, and then that's usually when we do appeals, and usually when people give donations. And then as they carry on and as they get older, of course, those funds can grow and be even more impactful. So it's just kind of a nice legacy that's connected to your class forever.
That's super interesting. And I apologize for bringing up this next topic, because I think no one likes talking about the pandemic, but I'm curious, like how has COVID impacted this field specifically, especially since relationship building is so important?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't mind talking about it. It's been really challenging for us, because our whole sort of basis of our work that we do is engaging people with the college. And so we can't invite people in to see what's happening. We can't have students speak to groups of people. We don't even kind of know what's going on sometimes, because we're not there. Like if I'm on campus, and I go to assembly every Monday to make sure like I hear what's going on. I feel energized by, some of the, whether it's people like hitting the back of the pews, or like calling out their different houses or whatever, or talking about, we get some great guest speakers at those assemblies, and we're not there. So you guys aren't there either, but it's really hard to stay connected. So I think, look, like every place, it's caused us to think about things a little bit differently. I think the advantage it has is that we were probably in the dark ages with our like everything we do in publications is print. So yeah, we're going to do some more digital stuff. That's probably a good idea. We are forced to do some of the things we should have been doing anyway. I think the other advantage is you can meet with people anywhere. So even though people are sick of Zoom meetings, I can meet with a potential donor in China really easily. I can meet with a CEO on Bay Street who like usually can't make time for me. Yeah, like popping on a Zoom call is not really a problem. So we have tried to use that to our advantage. And I would say I have had meetings with people who have never been able to meet ever in person. There's an old boy, he lives in British Columbia. He's head of a huge company, super successful guy. And I've worked here now for almost 11 years. I've never met him in person. And I've been out west, like out to branch events, and every time tried to connect, never met him. And I've met him on Zoom. So, and we've actually had like 3 meetings. And so I think, there's an advantage in some ways. I think, it's still limiting with newer people who we don't know and people we don't have any connection with to make that first connection online it's just not quite the same. And I do miss getting together with people. I do miss like having that personal interaction, but I think we've benefited from some of this, and there will be things we continue to do that, we will continue to have Zoom meetings. We will continue to try to produce digital materials that are more interactive and hopefully more effective from a communications perspective as well.
Okay, thank you for that. To wrap up now, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of your long-term projects for UCC? And are there any new fundraising projects planned for next year, this year?
So I think in the near term, we have some really exciting things that are coming up. We're still in discussion with our board, and I think we'll probably be going out to the community in September. But I can tell you, like I can give you a sneak preview. One of the things that we're going to be doing, which is really exciting, is we're going to be building a rowing facility at the waterfront. We have an opportunity that's really a once in a lifetime opportunity to get some federal land, which never happens, and to be able to build our own boat shed. So that's one really exciting project. Obviously for a niche group, but I think for UCC, it's an opportunity also to reach out into the community. We will be offering some community rowing programs that we're going to be offering for free. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to give back to the community and to not just be only here at our campus on Lonsdale Road, but to be out in the Toronto community as well. We're going to be doing some renovations to our facilities for sure. There's one that really needs it. You guys probably know which one that is, the pool. I think we'll definitely be pursuing the opportunity to build something new in that area. We have a very exceptional campus, as you know, 35 acres in the middle of the city. It's pretty green, but I think there's some more cool things we could do, like one of the ideas that's coming forward is potentially greening the avenue so that we become like completely pedestrian and not like having cars flying through all the time. We could also set up some really interesting, I guess, outdoor activity areas on our campus, which again, COVID maybe proved to us or reminded us like we have to use our outdoor spaces really effectively. And so I think there's some pretty neat stuff we can do there. And then there's some work in the prep school as well with, I don't know if any of you've actually made it down there, but we did a big renovation on part of the preparatory school, the park and wing, just opening up classrooms and making them much more transparent. And again, less of the old style of like little individual classrooms and then more collaborative. So we're going to do some more of that. They're called learning communities, and it's a much more modern way of teaching and interacting with students. And then the upper school has a few areas that could use some upgrading. The science wing on the second and third floor, science and languages actually, that unfortunately didn't get completed in the last campaign. So we're going to do some work on that facility. I think you guys need a new dining hall, probably. And so we might be thinking about consolidating our dining and making it much more much more effective, less lineup, less people squished on benches together dining hall. That's another one. And then on financial assistance, we're going to continue to keep building that because we do believe it's really important. And I don't think we're going to do more. Like, I don't think we're going to have more students on financial assistance, but we might have students receive a bit more funding and maybe also help students who maybe are here but don't have access to all of the, activities. So I think that will be another potential area. And then university counseling, that's another big one. The space right there isn't very good at the moment, and we want to improve that. University counseling, we have some really great new counselors. I don't know if you've met them, Brian and Michelle McDonald and Embry, and I think we want to continue to really build up that. Our Center for Learning is another flagship area for us that is leading in the world, really, and we want to continue to build it. So we have some more investment in the Center for Learning that we want to do. Just like medicine's becoming more individualized, learning's becoming more individualized. And so we are really trying to, strategically think about how that looks in the future and make investments now to be able to be ahead of the curve. So those are some of the nearer term objectives. And in the long term, I guess I just hope that UCC will continue to thrive, to be a place where people value education, to be a place where students have an opportunity to access some of the opportunities that maybe they wouldn't otherwise, and then maybe just to continue to be more open to the world, more international. That's my hope for UCC. I feel we're still like a little bit local, and I would love to see us be on more of a global stage. So how that looks, I think there's lots of things we can do, but those are some of the things I've been thinking about.
Wow. As a boarder, I cannot be more excited for a new dining hall or a new pool. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's probably not going to be done before you're gone, but we'll work on it anyway. You can come back and visit.
Sure, but those are all interesting projects. So this brings up to the end of the interview. Ms. Robertson, really appreciate you taking your time, sharing some of the insight experience with us, and those are really helpful.